Hello and welcome to another episode of The Future of. I'm your host, Azam Faruqi. Today we have a very interesting guest and a very interesting topic. It's quite popular these days. The idea of a metaverse. We hear a lot. Meta, for example, Facebook rebranded itself as Meta. They've invested a lot of money, and in metaverse there are a lot of critics. So we figured it's something that we'll cover on our episode today. And to talk about it, we have Wagner James Au, who's the author of an upcoming book, Making a Metaverse That Matters. He blogs about it on his New World Notes blog. I've recently started following James a few months ago, and I thought that was very interesting. A lot of learning for me. So thank you for coming on the show, James.
Hey, Zam. Good to be here. Thank you.
So let's start off for the benefit of our listeners and viewers. How would you define metaverse, and what's sort of like the conceptual history of it? Where did the idea
Yeah.
come from, and how did we end up to today?
Yeah. So the metaverse is a vast virtual world that's immersive, that's accessible through highly customizable avatars and user generated content tools, and is connected to a real world economy. So, in other words, you can create content and make a living from that content. And on the highest level, it is going to be integrated or is integrated with real world technology, such as you could connect it to, well, the web for one, but then also to cameras, robotics, different types of technologies beyond the virtual world. And that definition, I start my book, Making a Metaverse That Matters, with that definition, because from the last 3 years, thanks to Mark Zuckerberg and other people, the definition has become very tenuous and confusing to a lot of people, because I think Zuckerberg defined the metaverse as whatever they're making. But actually, the concept, if you go back to the novel Snow Crash from 1992 and just read what Neil Stephenson describes, that's basically what it is. And it's very important to start with the definition of the metaverse directly from Snow Crash, because the novel was incredibly influential in the beginning in the early 90s. Basically, anyone who got into technology at that time, and I include, like myself and people who were kids who read the novel, um, they wanted to build something like that. So I'm talking about, for example, John Carmack, very famous game developer, Tim Sweeney, lead developer of Fortnite, or he's head of Epic. That's a vision that they've been trying to create. Many people who kind of got into metaverse development, far as I can tell, Zuckerberg is one of them, were not as engaged with the concept and sort of blended it together with Ready Player One, a novel that was popular but not as influential as Snow Crash, that came out about 10 years ago. So um, I'd like to focus on that. And as I talk in the book, uh, not only was it influential, people started trying to build the metaverse basically immediately after the novel came out. I recount a scene in my book in Seattle where Neil Stephenson was hanging out with a bunch of people at World Design, a early virtual world company, VR company, and they were working through concepts of how to represent data, information, immersiveness of how we're going to interact, because the web really hadn't launched yet. So people were still working on conceptual approaches of how can we interact with the internet. And so the metaverse appeared, and then Neil Stephenson wrote it out based on a lot of this technology that was in the air, but also just kind of really thought through, himself being a coder, how this would work and why would it be compelling. His original goal was, okay, how could internet interaction be as compelling or even more compelling than television? And so that's the concept. And like I mentioned, there have been developers influenced by it. And For example, I mentioned Fortnite. That has about 85 million users. It's very directly inspired by the metaverse from Snow Crash. Roblox is even bigger, 250 million monthly active users. And again, Dave Buskuski, is the founder of Roblox. He read Roblox. I'm sorry, uh, Roblox, founded by Dave Buskuski. He read Snow Crash as well, and wanted to create the metaverse in college. So yeah, really, with the book, I'm trying to reframe the history of the metaverse and take it away from whatever Zuckerberg is talking about, because he clearly doesn't know that much about it.
Okay, so let's talk a little bit more about the idea, right? Like, because I think for someone who are not that much into technology, they still struggle with the idea. There are a lot of terms that get thrown around, Mark Zuckerberg's definition. A lot of people throw around using words like XR, augmented reality. Apple just, use the term
Yeah,
spatial computing. And a lot of times, sometimes it overlaps or it's confused with the metaverse. So, how are these things
yeah,
different or how are they connected?
yeah. That's that's something that anytime I see a news story, like I just saw in the New York Times, they confuse the VR with the metaverse
Hmm.
or XR, and the metaverse fundamentally it's a virtual world platform, and there are many ways to access it. So if you look at, like I mentioned, Roblox and Fortnite, they're the biggest ones. Most people access it through an iPhone or a Android phone, but you can access it through higher end computing devices like a laptop or a video game console. VR in some cases, actually, Roblox, they have an experimental version of VR, but it's not the focus. And so the metaverse is the platform. It's the virtual world that you access, and there's many devices you can use. In Snow Crash, Neil Stephenson describes people using VR. Well, the wealthy use VR, and then the people who are not wealthy will access it. He kind of describes like a sort of like a telephone, like a old school kind of on the street pay telephone. So um, very soon after the novel came out, the video game Doom came out, and that's a full 3D immersive experience. And Neil said, "Yeah, actually, I we don't really need VR. Just I played Doom and I immediately realized you can have a equally immersive, compelling experience playing a like a 3D game, or in other words, 3D graphics can be conveyed on a flat screen." So anyway, getting back to VR versus XR. So virtual reality, we know that's like the Quest headset, and what happens though is you have, with most of these latest VR headsets, you have a camera, and so that camera can absorb the real world. What? So let me back up. Most most VRs head uh, most VR headsets have a camera on them, so they can take the real world and turn that into data and make that part of the virtual world, and then you can incorporate whatever's happening in the real world with virtual content. And so with augmented reality, the focus is completely on the real world, and then it's layered over with digital content, and that could be anything from, as you saw with Apple Vision Pro, it could be like basically like a desktop, but it's in the real world and sort of overlaid with the real world, so you don't have to be looking at a screen because the screen is what you're seeing all around you. Uh, but you can also incorporate augmented reality virtual content where like you can have a little dragon fly through your house. So that's a difference. And mixed reality is is a combination of both those things. The virtual content and real world content that's displayed on a headset.
Awesome. So, in your blog, you explore that, you talk about virtual worlds, online communities, and you just briefly mentioned virtual worlds as well. How do these virtual spaces contribute to the concept? What role do they play in shaping its development? And I would say, potential future applications as well.
Well, that's another important theme for my book, Making a Metaverse That Matters, is that it's the user communities that are really the valuable thing about these platforms. It's the people who use them on a regular basis. They form friendships with people from all over the world, and metaverse platforms, uh, basically, unlike every other technology, especially social media, you are able to meet people from all over the world, and because you're controlling an avatar, and the avatar is completely customizable, it it affords the opportunity to meet people without assumptions of race or class or even age and geographic location. So you end up what you see in metaverse platforms is you see communities comprised of people from literally all over the world. And I've written a lot about Second Life, and yeah, I look at who I've met, and it's people in Asia, in Europe, in South America, all over the world, and that's something that social media really doesn't do very well because, well, first of all, the social networks are primarily our real world friends and acquaintances, and then if we start engaging with other people, it'll be generally around kind of content like like a video or a news story on Twitter or something. And so really there's no community around it. It's just people engaging with the content or the opinion, and that tends to be why social media is architected to drive outrage and getting people emotionally fired up. And in contrast with a metaverse platform, because you're in a shared space, because the sense of being in a shared virtual world is compelling enough that you feel that sense of presence that you're with other people, and so you engage with them in real time, and generally speaking, yeah, you engage with them very positively because it's all about playing together and creating together and exploring together. So yeah, that's what I'm hopeful about because it has an opportunity, is right now, for the half a billion people that use it, an opportunity to engage with people from all over the world in creative and productive ways.
Awesome. So, in order to get there, you said about half a billion people today.
Yeah.
What are the key challenges or obstacles that need to be overcome in order to fully realize the potential? And how do we address issues about, user experience, interoperability? I always struggle with that word.
Right.
Scalability. And one thing I always hear is that the critics would say that the metaverse doesn't really exist today, and there are a lot of other things that are called metaverse.
Yeah.
So what would we need to get there? And one issue people always talk about is hardware does not exist. Like, can you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah. Well, again, when people who say the metaverse doesn't exist, I'd say read Snow Crash, because
Mhm.
if you look at how he describes it, and I go through it, I go through the novel in the book and take out the passages where he talks about the metaverse. For example, he describes it as any point in time, 15 million people are logged into the metaverse from all over the world. And if you look at the most successful metaverse platforms like Roblox, Fortnite, Minecraft to a certain extent, VR chat, Rec Room, that's there are well over 15 million people online all the time in these metaverse platforms. Fortnite had a huge event with Travis Scott, the rapper, and that got upwards of 14 million people in that one platform all at the same time. So actually, the usage is already larger than what even Neil Stephenson imagined. So it's already here, and it's already larger than what was originally conceived. Now, what people say when they talk about interoperability is they kind of go with a false assumption that the metaverse is going to replace the web, and so they sort of assume that it's going to be a series of connected worlds that are like web pages, but the web is 2D, and it's very effective at conveying two-dimensional content, and so there's no reason to think it's gonna go away. I mean, even in Snow Crash, people still have email, and they exchange email with each other, so it's the metaverse would be, one channel among other channels on, for engaging with content on the internet, and the metaverse will serve real-time immersive content, especially that is, user generated. So yeah, that's kind of the premise there, and then to go back to the challenges, I explore this a lot in the book. Interoperability is not as big a challenge, I think, as a lot of people think. It really, as long as you're able to take your identity and your community around to different metaverse platforms, I think that's probably gonna be sufficient. Right now, people jump from one metaverse platform to another. What they do is they use Discord, which is a hugely popular platform, primarily for gamers, but that's how they meet and socialize in a 2D space, and they say, "Hey, let's go into this Roblox world," and they all jump in because they just share the link. So, as long as we have interoperability of community and identity, I think that's sufficient, and that's fairly easy to accomplish. The other challenges are more pressing, and one of them I call is the immersion funnel, and by that I mean if you look at how people interact with content, uh, gamers, it's about 1 billion people who will interact with 3D immersive content on a regular basis and actually enjoy it. So, talking about people who use video game consoles, who play MMOs like Elder Scrolls Online, who all these metaverse platforms, like it says, 500 million people. Um, all told, it's about 1 billion people. But there's about 8 billion people in the world. There's about 2 billion people who use the internet regularly, and the question is, do the people who not engage in 3D content, will they jump into a metaverse platform? And I tend to think probably not directly. What they'll probably do is they'll enjoy metaverse content in the mediums that they're already familiar with and that they enjoy, and that's fine. Like, for example, the the show The Mandalorian on Disney is actually it's created, most of it created in Unreal, which is a 3D graphics engine that generates highly, realistic or, uh, very, content rich, high, resolution graphics, and that's the same platform, for graphics that runs Fortnite, for example. So, you can in the very near future, you create whole TV shows and movies in a metaverse platform like Fortnite or Roblox that you can, broadcast on YouTube or a Disney Channel or whatever, and you don't have to be in the metaverse to be enjoying that. So, yeah, I think the 3D, we have to be realistic about that. Not everyone, not even a majority necessarily, will always enjoy 3D content. And I get into the book, for example, with VR. Um, there's studies that women have a strong propensity to get nauseous using VR, and it Dana Boyd did some really groundbreaking research, and she observed that this could be on a hormonal level. So it's not addressable by graphics. Is
Mm.
the data she was finding. So, you know, that's one of the reasons why I say VR is not necessary to the metaverse, and we don't want it to be necessary to the metaverse because women tend to have trouble using it. Um, but so yeah, you have the 3D challenge, and then you also have the I call it the metaverse age cliff, where the majority of users of these metaverse platforms I talked about, they tend to be preteens, teens, and people in their early 20s. And I speculate it's because people have the most. I speculate most people use metaverse platforms tend to be on the very young side because they have the most leisure time and the most time to play with friends. And as people hit their 20s, you can see that with the usage rates. The usage goes off really sharply around 24 or so. there's still people who use metaverse platforms that are adults. Like I'm Generation X. I still do it, and there are a lot of people who grew up with these that are still find them enjoyable. But there's definitely a age drop off, though it tends to go back up after your 20s. And so what it looks like is people, they have real lives for a while. They go to college, they start going on dates, they move to a city for a while, they meet people, they get married. And then after they've settled down, then they're looking for ways to be imaginative and creative after they have a job and after they have kids. So the activity starts going up. At least that's the hope. And the challenge ahead is for platforms like Fortnite, Roblox, and so on to grow the content in a way that's going to be appealing to adults. And there are ways to do that, though. It's definitely that's going to be one of the interesting and fun challenges.
Awesome. So it's interesting you mentioned how the usage peaks at 24, sort of drops off, and then
Yeah.
can see pick up again. So let's talk a little bit about the social impact. So one of the great things that have happened over the last couple of decades or a little bit more is we're more connected than ever, right?
Mhm.
If you move from one hemisphere to another, you still are in close contact with your loved ones. uh, you spend a lot of your time with them online, or so that also has an emotional aspect to it. One of the things that we're seeing over the years, and a lot of sociologists have written about, is social trust in societies. Obviously, I don't want to get too political, but there is polarization, and there's somewhat fracturing of a local community, right? Like, I mean, there used to be the concept of keeping up with the Joneses in the past, but today you're not really keeping up with Joneses. I mean, the Joneses don't live in your neighborhood, right? Like, they're somewhere else. If you're keeping up with them or have interacting with them, you don't know your neighbors as much.
Mhm.
Does that exacerbate the problem, or is there a way we can solve for it? Like, how does that play, or are there any unintended outcomes out of this?
Well, like I say in my book, one of the most powerful things about the metaverse is connecting people despite their geographic location and despite their accidents of race, birth, class, and so on. And so the other side of the coin is people specifically in your local area are not going to be the primary conduit with which you engage people in the metaverse. You can for sure. I mean, I live in LA, and I know people who are also fans of Fortnite or whatever, and we can go in and play, and we know each other socially, so we'll actually be chatting about a party we're going to, or a dinner we want to do together. So it can, I'd say what it would be is a conduit for people to be sociable and creative together after having made that real life connection. And I can see a time too where you have almost neighborhoods. In other words, probably be regional, like kind of city based, local based, because just because of internet connectivity, you're going to have the best experience if you are connected to people that are in the
Yeah.
same area as you, and you are, all participating together in a server that's connected to. Oh, actually, let me back up. You'd have the best experience with people in a metaverse platform when you're all in the same region, more or less, just because of internet connectivity and the speed of light has a limitation. So I think what we'll see is kind of little mini communities of people that are all like, in Fortnite or Roblox or whatever, that are in specifically Los Angeles or San Francisco or Toronto or wherever, just because it's easier for people and more fun because you have faster connections to be with each other in those areas. And then, for example, live music is really popular on
Mhm.
metaverse platforms, like Second Life and VR Chat, where people will actually um, stream their real life voice or play piano and or guitar and stream that into the virtual world so you can have a live concert. And so there's a lot of people who, well, I talk about it in the book. One of the people I wrote about, he's a 86-year-old black blues guitarist, and he made a side income by playing blues in Second Life, and he'd get fans from all over the world. And that's really awesome. It tends to be mostly solo musicians, and that's because if I'm playing a guitar in Los Angeles and you're playing drums in Toronto, there's gonna be like a half-second delay, and it it's almost impossible to be in sync with each other. But if the musicians are all in, Los Angeles, or they're all in Toronto or whatever, then you actually could sync together, and then you could have this really exciting. I mean, like live music in the virtual world, especially if you have really fantastic content and the world changes around you. You have dragons flying by. You have a really can have a really amazing experience. But yeah, it will become a locals only experience to do it all in sync. So yeah, I'm hopeful that we'll see more of that. You already see that to a certain extent, at least within, yeah, like I mentioned, like a regional, like not necessarily my neighbor next door, but someone who lives in the same city as me.
Okay. So I want to push on this topic a little bit because the theme of our podcast is future, right? So when we look at the
Mhm.
future, not just technological implications, but we look at what the economic, social impact is. So so do you think having that ability to connect with people so fractures our physical society? And the reason I say that is while it frees you up from the accident of your birth, r- you know, caste, race, and
Mhm.
you can customize your avatar. But on the flip side, maybe a good unintended out or maybe the good side of that accident is that you are around people that are very different from you and you learn to interact with them, right? And you
Yeah,
learn to coexist.
yeah,
So if you get into a metaverse and it was like, okay, I'm creating this customized avatar, I'm looking for X kind of people. And okay, now I have a community of X. Now suddenly
yeah,
there's another small, and we hang out, we have, we discuss our whatever our interests are. And suddenly you see that X community, there's a small fissure, like difference of opinion. And suddenly that splits into, let's say, an X2 community. And then suddenly, like are we going to get narrower and narrower from that standpoint, or like only looking for people who are exactly like us?
uh well, it's interesting with metaverse platforms. What happens is people will have an affinity of different types of experiences that they all enjoy. Like, so, they might enjoy just creating 3D content and creating content together. Like, just amazing, like experience you just see in like VR chat. Like, it'll be
Mm.
just giant castles and whole cities and games that are made by dozens of people and all over the world. And so they share the affinity of the content, but they'll actually often have very different life experiences. So it'll be, that's kind of how you sort of see people and have more empathy with them, is just you have that one shared affinity of you enjoy 3D content, you enjoy being in kind of immersive experiences and playing together, creating together, but other than that, have very different life experiences, and I've seen that. I've experienced that a lot. Like, I started writing about metaverse platforms 20 years ago. I was the embedded journalist for Second Life. Started in 2003, and I met people that had very different life experiences. One I remember is she was a sex worker in Japan who, in her offline time, she was creating a memorial to the Hiroshima bombing, and it was like kind of like a vision of hell. But she was trying to express that, and really powerful. And yeah, again, like I'm American, so I have a slightly different take on that. And yeah, that's something that again you know the shared affinity is the 3D immersive experience. But once you get past that, you have the chance to meet all kinds of different people. So really, it's in opposition to social media, because social media algorithmically tries to connect people with the same worldview, and that's why you get these kind of very disturbing echo chambers where you know you you have social connections and affinities with people who share your same political view, or you know ideological view, or even disturbingly, like often like a racial or nationalistic
Hmm.
view. And algorithmically, there's no there's no safety valve to encourage diversity of opinion, or diversity of social connections. And so yeah, metaverse platforms don't function that way. It's really
Hmm.
about having the shared experience.
Awesome. So, one of the cool things that I find interesting from someone who's not like a techie, right? But the
Right.
concept is it gives you the ability to build a world from scratch. Yes, it's a
Yeah.
virtual world, but it allows you to build one from scratch. And how do you create that, you know, a better world out there?
Right.
So when we talk about, building this, what are some of the ethical considerations that should be taken? So when you're designing these virtual worlds, how do we
Mhm.
ensure safety, digital rights for all participants? How do we, balance protecting the privacy and ensuring that trust in the platform while, you still have these interactions? How do you build that?
Yeah, there's a lot of ethical concerns with the metaverse and metaverse platforms in particular that I go a lot into in my book. One of the main ones is, like I said, people tend to be very young, so you have a lot of minors. Like Roblox has a lot of kids, more than most of the other platforms, and they've done generally a good job protecting kids' safety. But that's an important aspect. The thing that hasn't been discussed enough yet is with these platforms, you create content by definition, but also by definition, that means that you're effectively creating content for a for-profit company. And I think a lot of parents who have kids in Fortnite or Roblox or VR chat or whatever, they're not cognizant of the fact that their kids are creating content and then the company is profiting off them. Now, also essential to a metaverse is you can make a living from creating your content, or you can make a revenue from that content. And what we're seeing now, by and large, is most of these platforms, the revenue share is not as good as it could be. There's been some changes slowly, like Fortnite just added some ways for people to make more revenue from their content. But for the most part, though, it's kind of a pretty unfair cut. Like it's with Roblox, it's roughly 70% that the company takes, and the consumer, the creator, actually takes 30%. And with the Second Life, for example, is actually more the creator takes 70% and the company takes 30%. And we want to get better to that. We want to get a better balance of the creator benefiting from their work, uh, and the company. Of course, they should take a cut, but it should definitely be fairer for the creator. So that's one of the big ethical issues. Another one, well, this is this is if Apple get, or I'm sorry, another concern is going to become more pressing if Meta gets its way, because they are very open about wanting to leverage user data to for advertising. And that opens up a whole Pandora's box of ethical concerns, because really, if you're tracking people's eyesight, it's almost like you can read their mind, because you're seeing what you're seeing. I'm sorry, almost like you can read their mind because the company is tracking what people are looking at. So it's almost like they're seeing what you're seeing and what you're coveting, because they can tell how how long you look at a product, or how long you look at an ad. And so, yeah, a lot of scary implications with that. I mean, fortunately, Meta is messing up their strategy so bad, hardly anyone uses their metaverse platform, which is called Horizon Worlds. But if they're successful, or if other companies are successful, that's going to be something we have to start talking a lot more about.
So right now, all these platforms are proprietary platforms, right?
Mhm.
Would we ever get to a point where we're going to have an open metaverse?
There's been a lot of talk around creating a quote unquote open metaverse, in the sense that it's open source, and that people can, you know, create their own world and own their content. And that's been difficult to implement. There's been attempts, like there's one called OpenSim, which I write about. It's an open source version of Second Life, and there was a lot of effort to scale it. IBM was part of that collaboration with Linear Lab, the creators of Second Life. They tried to make an open source metaverse platform. It really didn't scale, and no other attempt has scaled. And partly is you do need that walled garden where people feel like they're in a singular virtual world that they share with people within that same immersive space. And like I mentioned before, the model of trying to create a web, like like an open murder, the attempt to create an open metaverse like the open web is going to up against the problem that like a virtual world is. It's not a 2D space. You can't like create hyperlinks on a mountain or a river. So it's not going to be interoperable in that sense. And it's also just going to be jarring for people because they want to be in one immersive experience, but if they jump into one that has a very different aesthetic, very different user experience, it's a different world almost. So really, to me, more than creating an open metaverse, the important thing is to, like I said, have interoperable user logins and be able to take your community with you. So if you don't like what one platform is doing, you can say, well, okay, I'm out of here, and I'm bringing my friends with me, and they can go to another platform. So that would uh, that would create a kind of a, at least a attitude or a approach that is open, in the sense that people can go seamlessly from one platform to another. Eventually, I can see a Minecraft model where what Minecraft does is people can own their own server, and if you have the Minecraft program, you can access you know hundreds of thousands of servers from all over the world that people actually have on their computer. And so I can see that happening on a larger scale. Minecraft is still really huge. It's last check, upwards of 200 million users. But yeah, as these platforms become more popular, I could see one of them emerging and having a model like that, where you have your own server, and that actually protects the company too, because sometimes people create content that the company doesn't want to be responsible for, and they can say, well, that's on their server and that's their responsibility. So eventually, but yeah, I think again, you want to have, first and foremost, interoperability of user identity, and you want to grow these platforms. And we're still, we're
Mhm.
still at a point where there's you know a large user base, but they're in different platforms. So that's what's more important, is creating a way for people to bridge them easier through their logins.
Okay. Now, in one of your posts, I think was on LinkedIn, you mentioned the impact of blockchain on the metaverse. Can you talk a little bit more about how that can enhance
Yeah.
um, the experience or the functionality or scalability?
So far, blockchain and Web3 as a broader concept has done basically nothing for the metaverse concept. I strongly suspect that people who own crypto like Ethereum or Bitcoin, they were looking for a use case, because that's kind of been the fundamental problem with cryptocurrency is people don't really use it for buying and selling goods and services. And at the same time, you have these metaverse platforms where people use virtual currency for buying and selling goods and services all the time. I never tire of telling people that more people use Linden dollars, the virtual currency of Second Life, than use Bitcoin. That's still the case. And so I think the blockchain folks were looking for metaverse platforms as a way of making these things actually usable. And there's been attempts, like Decentraland is probably the most well known. And again, really, they haven't grown. Hardly anyone is using them, and I think it's because really, when you have a hidden motive, which is in other words, owning virtual land on a blockchain based metaverse, your motivation is not to be part of a community. Your motivation is to own valuable real estate and then sell it at a profit. So these platforms don't really have communities. They have people who are all trying to make a score, and consequently, their user base is really like Decentraland. It has a few thousand daily active users, so it's a really small niche.
Let's talk a little bit about some of the industries that might get impacted in the near future. So obviously, we've seen concerts like Travis Scott. You gave an example.
Mhm. Yeah,
We've seen that. What are some of the other technologies that you see can be impacted, or not in technologies, I should say, industries or
yeah.
kinds of work that could be impacted or disrupted?
Real world marketing and brand extension is going to be the primary use case of metaverse platforms, and the industry that is being disrupted a bit by the metaverse, and I think even more in the future, especially if companies are smart. They're going to realize that there's consumers who are kids now, and if they create a connection with them now in a metaverse platform, they can grow that affinity and engagement into adulthood. And so there's been a lot of interesting marketing initiatives in platforms like Roblox. Like there was one for Chipotle, the fast food chain, where they created kind of a fun game experience where you're building burritos. Kind of a fun casual game, but I looked. I think the first 2 months, about a 6 million kids went in, mostly kids, and yeah, it's fun, engaging content. Obviously, again, you have to have the ethical considerations of what kind of advertising and to whom and to what age. But that's been a really interesting one. I talked to a fellow metaverse content expert who's been working with brands on extending their brands. So, for example, you have all of this content that exists across different mediums. You have movies, TV, books, and you can bring that into a immersive experience in Fortnite, Roblox, VR chat, and so on. And that's extending your brand, and you can monetize it. You can bring in new users to, if you enjoy the experience, you can see the TV show. So that's another way of disrupting kind of marketing, media, intellectual property industry. And that's going to be the first one. And really, because it's about working with the existing consumer base of these metaverse platforms. So it's going to be that for a while. I get into the other applications, for example, like doing real world meetings in a metaverse platform, and I've seen some interesting success. It's going to be more of a kind of one-off sort of thing, like where you'll have, for example, people who are remote workers for a company. They'll on occasion they'll meet in a virtual world and have a meeting space that's a lot more fun than Zoom. So that's going to be an interesting use case we'll see more of. I think, like I said, I don't think we're all not going to be going to a metaverse platform instead of Zoom all the time. I think on occasion we will. That's already starting to happen. But yeah, that's another one.
Okay, awesome. Now, one thing that usually, and I don't think we've discussed yet, is there's a lot of myth surrounding the metaverse as well, right? what it is, what it isn't, or like some. Can you talk a little bit more about that?
Well, I got into one of them about Web3 as part of the metaverse. And like I said, it was never conceived to be part of the metaverse and has proven itself not being able to be part of the metaverse just because it can't scale users. Listen, we've covered a lot of them. One myth that's actually pretty controversial, and I'm happy to get into the argument, is
Mhm.
that there's one metaverse. Now, when Neil Stephenson conceived the metaverse in Snow Crash, the implication is there's only one metaverse, and it actually encompasses the internet in the sense that if you want to be immersive in the internet, you go into the metaverse. And what we've seen, like I've said before, is there's actually multiple platforms that are about as large as the metaverse that he imagined in Snow Crash. So what I think it will have, at least for the near term, is we're going to have many large metaverse platforms. That's what we have now, and we'll see that trend continue. And I think that's fine. And I think it's a myth to say there's going to be one metaverse because again, fundamentally, the metaverse is a virtual world platform, and a virtual world is going to have a very specific aesthetic, and the aesthetic will vary from one virtual world to another. And what we see is even the user experience, actually how you engage with it, how you create content, how you customize your avatar, like the controls, that's actually part of the experience. So some people will like one type of virtual world experience and others will not want to uh let me back up. The people that enjoy one metaverse platform like Roblox will not necessarily want to go into another metaverse platform like Fortnite. And so they'll probably grow kind of in parallel with each other, but they not might not necessarily link. And so I think the idea that we're going to have one the metaverse is still kind of out in question. I kind of take it as an empirical question, like, well, if it satisfies all of Neil Stephenson's original description and it's as large, so it has 15 million people all the time, we can just say that's one the metaverse. Though what'll likely happen though is we'll have several of them that fit all of the qualifications, but they won't necessarily be linked up together. Though I hope people will be able to take their identity on some level from one to another.
Okay. So, moving on as we move towards the end of our episode, just a few things. So, keeping these things in mind, we've talked a little bit about the future implications. Couple that I want to ask, first of all, is from a regulatory standpoint. Like right now, obviously, we don't have much regulation around it, but what role do you see governments and regulatory bodies playing in shaping the metaverse or the future of metaverse? And what frameworks do you think we need to facilitate like the healthy development?
There's definitely a role for governments to play in the evolution of the metaverse. First and foremost, really, like I've mentioned before, and is a large percentage of these users are kids. So there has to be, I think, extra protections
Hmm.
for kids over and above what companies do to prevent themselves from getting sued by angry parents. There should be more protection, especially like I mentioned before, around kids creating content and the fact that companies are profiting off of them. So there should be some globally accepted standards. Um, Another avenue that governments should be involved in is giving metaverse users more control over how much revenue they make,
Hmm.
and that they should benefit more from them. And that's something I would like to see more because, like I mentioned, the creators, the community creators on these platforms are not making as much revenue as they should, in my opinion, based on the just the sheer amount of hours they're putting into it and the company profiting from them. So that should be a discussion. The other regulatory discussion really is the fact that, like I mentioned, most of these users are accessing metaverse platforms on Android and iOS, and so really the question is how much should these platforms take? Right now, they're taking 30%. And like in the case of Apple specifically, you have to go through Apple if you're going to be on an iPhone, or you have to go through the Apple App Store, and the App Store takes 30%. So really, these companies are partly stymied. Of these companies are partly stymied by Apple taking 30% or Google taking 30% through Google Play, and the fact that people cannot access other platforms, devices, or the fact that just the 30% take is so much. And so I think there should definitely be some government involvement around that. I mean, especially, Apple is insanely profitable, and a lot of that profit is from metaverse platforms like Roblox. It used to be Fortnite. Fortnite left because of this problem. So that's, yes, definitely something to be addressed too.
Awesome. So, lastly, if so, let's say if there's someone who has never experienced metaverse or any kind of immersive technology. So, if you want to get into it, what would you recommend? Like, what platform, or maybe how would they go about it? Like, just to get themselves acquainted.
So for getting started in the metaverse course, I self-interestedly recommend getting into my book, read my book, and I talk about some of the leading metaverse platforms. I think VR chat is the most interesting one. The Roblox and Fortnite, which I cover as well, are also very interesting. Second Life, if you have a powerful enough computer, still has a very interesting community. And like I mentioned before, they have an older community. It tends to be people in their 30s, 40s, and 50s. So if you're if you're that age, you'll find content that's more interesting for people of that age range. Um, I tell people really too, if you're not interested in 3D spaces, if you're not a gamer who enjoys 3D immersive games, that you shouldn't necessarily feel pressured to get into these. I mean, it's read my book. You can go on YouTube to watch videos, because a lot of the metaverse experience is on YouTube and Twitch, where people just share their experiences. And so, like for example, you could watch for example, you watch the Travis Scott experience that happened in Fortnite. It's on YouTube, and it looks about as cool. I mean, you're not getting a full immersive experience, but like I say, if people who are not interested in 3D immersive experiences will not necessarily jump into them immediately, and should not feel pressured to, because that's something for the companies to sort of meet the consumer halfway on, and that's still being worked on. Like I mentioned in my book, during the pandemic, the Nintendo game Animal Crossing became really popular, and it's not a metaverse platform, but it is 3D. But they made it so that casual users can play it, because it's not aggressively immersive, like you kind of clicking on your character and moving them around, but you're not like in this kind of very first person uh, immersive experience that could cause a lot of people to get motion sickness. So I'm hoping that metaverse platforms sort of adjust around the fact that most people, it's about 1 in 4 people who do enjoy immersive experiences, but 75% of people don't necessarily want to go into a full immersive experience. And so companies have to adjust around that and make it more of a leisurely enjoyable experience for people like that. And so if you're not a fan of 3D immersive experiences now, just wait a while, because the companies will have to meet you halfway.
Awesome. I think this is a good place for us to end our conversation. Before we end, a couple of questions we always ask all our guests. So, one of them is there a book that you've recently read or are reading that you would like to recommend, a TV show, movie? In So before that, I would also say that James, you've mentioned your book is coming out, I think, in June of well, this month actually, it's coming
Yes,
out.
yeah, June 27th.
June 27th. So, yeah, please pre-order the book. We're gonna put the link in our show notes or in the video description as well. So please check that out. James has also written a couple of other books as well: The Making of Second Life and Game Design Secrets. Check out the blog, New World Notes. Um, for someone like myself who's pretty novice in that area, I found that very helpful, very interesting. So really appreciate that. So yeah, I mean, any recommendations you have? I know we will probably Snow Crash would be one. So if someone was interested, I think it's a good place to start. You said,
Yeah,
but
definitely Snow Crash. That would be, I mean, it's a really fun read. It's a cool cyberpunk thriller. Neil Stephenson is a really good writer as well as being a great technologist. So it's just a fun read. Some of the stuff doesn't age as well. There's a little bit with the teenage girl that kind of doesn't age as well, but it's overall it's a really fascinating and great book. So I always recommend people start with that. I mean, just speaking in general, people ask what book to read. I always say Moby Dick, and people go, "Whoa, wait, I don't want to read that book. I tried in college." And there's a site called the Moby Dick Big Read that is various people like Tilda Swinton, actual sea captains, and people who are fans of Moby Dick reading one chapter at a time, so you can almost play it like a podcast. It's one of the greatest human inventions. Really amazing, ahead of its time, still ahead of its time. So, just in general, yeah, it's a great place to think about humanity. It's almost like a virtual world on the Pequod, just of us cross section of people on the ship. So yeah, really fascinating for all kinds of reasons.
awesome. And a TV show or a movie?
Oh, I thought Free Guy was a really fun movie that conveyed a lot of the concepts of the metaverse in a really fun way, and especially with the popularity of AI
Hmm.
with ChatGPT and so on. It's an interesting way of thinking about agents, like in other words, AI powered non-player characters, and the idea that they could eventually gain sentience, which that's a whole other conversation, but it's a really fun way of conveying why these virtual worlds are so fun and engaging and lots of possibilities, really just kind of as a fun imagination space. So yeah, yeah, Free Guy was of recent movies I thought really effectively conveyed that.
Okay, awesome. Well, thank you very much for your time, James. We really appreciate it, and hopefully we can have you back on the show again sometime in the future. So
Cool.
thanks everyone for watching, listening, and have yourself a great day.
Cool.